All right, folks, Urban Sentinel, power outages, blackouts, grid down. All connected, all very similar, slight differences between them. Let's start with the basics. A power outage, on its simplest terms, you've got too many items running in your house on the same circuit blows. All you do is you shut one off, unplug something, move it to a different plug on a different circuit line, flip it back up. Expand that out just a little bit, and you have a block, an area, perhaps a tree limb on a power line, a rampaging squirrel, a car, vehicle versus pole type of situation. It may take out power to the block that you're on, maybe half the street going in one direction, but another street just a half block over is fine because it's actually getting its power through a different transformer. Power companies can see that, they can isolate it, they can get to work and fix the problem. When it's a larger area, when you have those small substations, when there's problems with those, or you have a junction of several different power lines coming out of one of those areas where there's an effect, it spreads. You get a neighborhood or a citywide blackout. It may affect a town next door because it's feeding off of the same line. So even though the damage isn't in one town, it's affecting that town. What we're looking at for the summer, what they're predicting is high levels of heat waves throughout the West Coast and potentially stronger storms and hurricanes here on the East Coast and through the Gulf. So we're going to be expecting to have a lot of situations where we're going to have blackouts. With that being said, first thing off the top is you should have some type of blackout kit set up. That means working flashlights with at least 2 sets of batteries. If you're using single-use batteries, personally 3. If you have rechargeable batteries, great. Have at least 2 and have at least the second set ready to be charged up or already charged up, and you just keep them in rotation. So even if you're not using that flashlight and it's got rechargeable batteries in it and you've got another set, at least once a week, make sure that other set is charged up, take them out, put them into the flashlight, put the other ones in, because rechargeable batteries do start to lose power as they just sit there doing absolutely nothing. They lose power versus single use batteries. It takes years of non use before they actually start to effectively lose their energy. You want to be able to make sure that when the power does go out, even on a short term basis, that you have flashlights ready and on hand. If you have candles or oil lamps, that's great, but make sure of 2 things, please. One, ventilation, because having the candles and the oil lamp is great, but if you're dying from CO poisoning, no bueno. Second thing, fire extinguisher, because accidents do happen. Something may occur and you're not thinking, and you turn your attention away for a few minutes, and then next thing you know, half your place is on fire and you've got just seconds to get out. So make sure that if you're using candles, you've got your matches and you've got your lighters and you've got your oil lamps, that you have a fire extinguisher ready and available and you know how to use it. Or at the minimum, small bucket of sand. Something that if it's spread, especially if it's a liquid and it's spilled out, you can quickly douse and cover it to smother out the fire. Moving up to the next stage, when the power does go out, in many cases, the utility companies will shut power off intentionally because they're monitoring everything. So they know that on a Monday morning, that there's a large industrial center of machines and factories or data centers with computers that are going to be cranking out and churning up and pulling a lot of power, but they're also on the same line or within the same section that there might be a large housing community of multiple apartment buildings, 100 units per building, or a large suburban area where you might have 1,500 to 2,500 to 5,000 single family houses. They know that there's going to be a surge of electricity, especially if the weather's predicting that, Monday morning the heat wave will start at 10 o'clock in the morning and reach 80, 85 degrees and move to 95 degrees by midday. They know people at this point are going to be cranking on the ACs and drawing a lot of power, so they may dial it down in certain areas to keep other systems up. With that being said, if you look at hospitals, especially larger, newer hospitals or regional hospitals that effectively support a wide area, many of them have backup systems, or they should have backup systems on site. Some of them, they are fed by natural gas generators. Some have fuel delivered or have a fuel storage system set up on site to run it. Some of them, depending upon the size of the hospital, it runs the entire facility, every single square foot of it. Others, it operates the emergency rooms literally and the critical needs and keeps the climate control operating and certain lights in areas operating, communications up. But most power companies, for safety reasons, isolate those lines going to it so they could effectively shut the power off to everything around the hospital on all the surrounding blocks, but keep the hospital up and running and not allow it to pose a threat to line workers that may have to do repairs in the area but not have to shut down the hospital. Some systems aren't set up that way. Sometimes the hospital is on the same grid as the convenience store across the street, and when the power goes out for the convenience store, power goes out for the hospital. But again, they usually will have a backup. Your police departments, law enforcement departments will usually have some type of backup power system. They have to keep their communications up so they can communicate to all of their law enforcement officers out in the field. Fire stations, again, a lot of them backup systems at the fire stations. So many of the municipal and state, federal type of things, hospitals will have alternate or backup systems to keep them up and running. But everybody else, once the power goes out, it's more of an independent thing. Your gas station may lose power. No power, no pumps. Some gas stations do have backup generators just to run the cooler in the back for the beer and the soda, and just to keep the lights on and leave the register running long enough for the cashier to basically close out and lock up shop because the pumps themselves might be off. Others have full systems to run everything because they know that they're on a street with 3 or 4 of the gas stations, and if they're the only gas station that has full power and the pumps are running, they're going to make the most money. Grocery stores or retail stores that sell food, same thing. It's a situation where, as an example, there's a Target near my house. It's on the grid for the city. Power goes out, they lose power. Sometimes the power is only out for an hour or so, but because of FDA and health guidelines, they have to pull certain types of freezer and refrigerated foods off the shelves if the power's been out longer than X number of minutes. Irregardless, it goes that 1 minute over, they have to pull it. And they do it because they don't want the health risk and the liability for not pulling those things off the shelf. Some places do have power systems that kick in and stay on long enough for them to basically manage and mitigate certain things. Maybe they have the freezers in the back in certain supermarkets where they can move several pallets worth of goods back into it if they think it's going to be a long-term thing. Other cases, it's just the stock that's in those freezer sections stays frozen, and what's out on the shelf, pretty much that's it. But you also run into the problem that when the power is down, many of them, the backup systems for the computers only stay on to effectively properly shut the computers down. Many of the registers, the point of sale systems, don't operate anymore. So whether it's self-checkout or cashier checkout, cash in hand or card, nothing's going to work. Some systems, they do have it where they can run a minimum number of registers to keep the system up long enough to basically scan it, and it goes into the data inventory, and then everything is all set. For your own area, we're looking at situations where we could be without power due to a storm, due to a rolling blackout, due to some other event, that it might be a day, 2 days, a week. If it's a wide scale event, if it's a regional event, if it's something that goes from Boston to Baltimore, it might be a cyber attack, because the chances that, yes, there have been situations where power lines have gone down at the right location along a set of transformer lines, and it kills power to a wider area because those lines feeding out from the generation point aren't getting to that first set of substations that then would deliver it to wider reach areas within the region. A cyber attack is worse because a cyber attack is internal. It's in the software, it's in the computer programs that control all that. So the physical transformers are fine, the substations are fine, the pole transformers, everything is physically fine, the lines are all up, but the computers aren't getting the message to send that power out. And in some cases, if it affects the actual generation plant itself, that generation plant may shut down, simply switch itself off, and there's no way to immediately turn it back on without removing that malware from the system. Looking at where we're at currently, if we have a situation where that occurs, then we have to be prepared that we could be without power for a substantially long amount of time. And with that being said, we have to understand that, as an example, food. The food that you have in your freezer, the food that you got in your refrigerator, if you don't have your own backup system, then you're going to have to look at a way to either effectively prep and cook the food so you get a few more days worth out of it, or prep and effectively maintain that food status. Now, something as simple as bags of ice in the freezer can help give you several extra hours to days of keeping food frozen. Even in a refrigerator, if you're not opening and closing it, and you've got most of the food that's in there inside containers so they are less prone to the warming temperatures, putting them in, Tupperware and having a bag of ice inside the refrigerator can help keep that air cooler a little bit longer, even as that compressor starts radiating the heat with inside the refrigerator. I've got several styrofoam coolers that I have set up for that purpose, that I can go to 2 different convenience stores within a quarter to a half a mile and get several bags of ice, and then use that ice, putting it inside the freezer chest and inside the refrigerators to keep the food that's in there cold, as well as putting it into the styrofoam coolers for other food. But if we know that we're going to be without power for a while because we don't have our own backup system, because that's a whole separate thing altogether with my old generator, that's what we're going to have to do. But I also know that we're going to have a certain level of loss, that we're not going to be able to freeze and keep frozen or prep and cook every single thing that we have in there all at once, and then still be able to maintain it during that time period that it's out. So there is going to be some loss. No one likes it, but that's just the way it is. So you have to keep that in mind, that you will have some loss at some point. Moving forward, if, as it were the example that it was a cyber attack and it shuts down power within your region, multiple grids down where they have no way of getting it up, it's going to be very dicey, as it were, depending upon how long that lasts. 1 or 2 days, inconvenience. A week, 2 weeks, that's a serious situation, because you have a lot of other places that require and need power, that if it's not getting to them and they don't have backup systems, you're going to have some problems. You think about the nursing home facilities. A lot of them, the people that are there are still able-bodied and they're still relatively healthy, but they're still in that category that if it's a 95-degree day out and you've got literally a bunch of 90 and 95-year-olds there, and there's no AC, there's no lights, there's no way to cook and prepare the food, or even just keep popsicles frozen, you're going to have a health situation going on. You're going to have situations where a lot of people don't realize that their water and sewer is controlled by pumps, and if those pumps shut down, especially if the pumps at different junction points are effectively shut down in a closed position, you get sewage backup, because at a certain point, everything that gets flushed out doesn't continue on its pathway. It starts to back up, and it may not immediately back up to your individual house line, but it may back up within the street sewer line to the point where it causes more problems, and eventually, yes, you will get a backup into your system. You look at a lot of the traffic signals and the control lights, that's obviously going to be down, and there's only so much that an individual police officer can do at a corner, because you would literally, in this case, need a cop at every corner just to keep the traffic moving. So what ends up happening is some municipalities will just put out 4-way stop signs, and other places they'll just what happens, and they'll write a report later on. The situations that can occur can escalate the longer the power goes out. You look at a prison system, they usually will have their own backup system. Many of them have a backup system for that purpose, but for how long that system stays up and running. Are they separate on a grid where they're still receiving power, or do they have a longer term backup solution to keep things going? Because again, it's not even as much the cell doors will open wide and the prisoners are running crazy. It's they can't monitor anything. Their cameras may go down at a certain point. Their radios, for whatever charts they have in their handhelds, may work, but the main radios for the facility, if those are not up and running, you may have difficulty having people communicate inside buildings to outside the building, one end of a block to the other end of the block, especially when multiple floors and levels are involved. you get a situation where if there is an actual prison break, they may not be able to immediately notify the surrounding law enforcement for the towns around that, hey, we had a breach or we had a breakout and we've got, 500 prisoners out and about and escaping. Situations like that, you tend to think about, but you don't tend to think, well, that's, something way down the line. That could be something that could happen just like that. It may not even be week 3 of a grid down situation, but it is something that you have to consider. Same thing with the hospitals. The hospitals, if they have a backup system and that backup system runs out of power, at a certain point, critical needs, ICUs, things like that, they all lose power and they fail to operate. People on dialysis, neonatal care, children in the small little incubators, things like that. People that are on respirators and on other things to keep them alive, surgeries that might be going on because it's an emergency situation and that operating room loses power, that last bit of power is gone from it in the middle of a surgery. All those things can greatly affect how we function in our society. Our cell phones, your cell phone may be fully charged and you've got a car charger and you're all set, but if the cell towers around you lose power, they're not sending that signal out, they're not receiving that signal. Most people, not everyone, most people don't use their landlines anymore. So the landlines are still there and the phone companies still are running landlines, but they don't have them in their house connected anymore. Most of us, we communicate through our cell phones, and some of you have internet packages where you communicate effectively through your internet service. If the power goes out for your internet service provider, whether it's at their main station or at a transfer station, no power, no communication. Again, these are small things that become worse as the time goes on. So you have to be prepared that it may not just simply be a quick fix that, oh, we can just do this and this will take care of it. It could be something that continues to spread. Cyber attack would definitely cause that problem. Physical attacks, not as much, because yes, a physical attack on a power generation station could be a problem depending upon the size of the station and how it affects the wider area. But hitting a substation or small transformers still tends to be localized. So it's not something that is an immediate long-term issue, because you can go 2 blocks over, like I said before, and everyone still has power. You can go to the next town and things are fine. Now that may cause a run on resources in those surrounding areas, because now people will leave and go to those towns for gas, they'll go to those towns for food, and that pulls their supply. And of course, when people in those towns realize that the other towns are coming in, they're going to start rushing to get more of what they need, because they know that, oh, all these people are coming from the town with no power coming into ours, so we need to get more supplies. And then of course that feeds the beast, where suddenly now those businesses are running out of supplies far faster than they normally would, and they have to then make their orders and hopefully get those supplies in, which of course we're still having the supply chain issue. And if it's a small independent business, it may be a week or two before they get something. And if it's a chain business, they might be able to get supplies from a neighboring or nearby franchise or other store to have it sent over so they can restock quickly, especially if it's in a situation where that individual store may be without power for a long period. They may shift some of their supplies to the other location to keep it fresh, to keep it viable for sale. But for this summer, that's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting more power outages, multiple power outages. They may be small or longer term power outages depending upon the situation. And that's going to have a greater effect, not just on the locations where they're at, but also on the economy as a whole. It's going to have an effect on the shipping, the supplies, things coming in and out, because you have a lot of logistic companies and retail companies and warehouses that if their power's out, their computers are off, they can't track anything. They can't schedule anything. They can't fill orders for anything. So they have no way of getting the goods out. The goods are there, but they can't get them out. They can't, dedicate the trucks and the trailers that they need to ship out and supply things, because they have no way of pulling anything up on their system. So you can have the supplies, but they're no longer available. And we're going to see situations where if we do have these type of blackouts, whether they be controlled by the power companies, or it's a cyber attack, or it's just an overuse and a drain on the system, it's going to end up causing small cascades. Maybe not complete failure, but small cascade events will occur where one thing happens, boom, then the next one, then the next one, and then the next one. And next thing you know, 72 hours becomes 128 hours, becomes 248 hours of no power or longer. So it's just something to think about. And like I said before, you should have yourself a blackout kit, flashlights, batteries, candles, fire extinguisher. Have those things ready. If you have your own backup system, whether it's a solar system that's hooked to your house that can run off the grid, whether it's a portable system, whatever it may be, make sure it's up and running and functional. Pay attention to your security, especially at night over longer periods. Maintain light security. The last thing you need is your house being the one house that people see flashes of light from a room that you've got or a hallway because you forgot to turn that off once the sun went down and sort of blend in. If you have a generator and you have to run it, find that time to run it. People realistically aren't going to be out and doing things 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. So that may be that brief period that you run your generator for 10-15 minutes to keep your freezer and your refrigerator at the cooler temperature for a little bit longer. You might try running it during the daytime when, yes, people are going to be out, but there's also going to be a bit more noise because as long as it's not an EMP, cars are going to be functional. So people are going to be trying to drive over to the next town, 2-3 towns away, or go to that place where someone said, oh yeah, they've got power in this location, go here. So they may not notice the sound of a generator running. Hell, if you want to, fool people. Get your lawnmower out. Start cutting your grass while your generator's running. So when someone hears that sound, they go, oh no, it's just the guy mowing his lawn again. You know, 4th time this week. Seems to run it at the same amount of time. They may not pick up on that, or they may. It's just something that you can try. Anyway, so that's all I got for now. I'll catch you guys in the next one.